Welcome to our global audience. My name is Helen Lardner and I am the President of Australia ICOMOS. This marker event is being held to acknowledge the excellent work and wonderful support for the 20th Triennial General Assembly and Scientific Symposium of ICOMOS that could not be hosted in Sydney in 2020. To begin, we will show a video provided by the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, who will welcome us to the lands of the Gadigal, from where this live stream is being broadcast.
Bajuri, Gamarua, Dian, Babana, Gamarada, Gadigal, Nagara. On behalf of Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, as the CEO, I am proud to provide a welcome to country for tonight's online ICOMOS Marker event. I wish to acknowledge that I opened in the Gadigal language as provided by Paddy Garang in her conversations with Lieutenant Dawes thereabouts in 1790, 1791 in what today is known as Dawes Point and/or known as Dara or Tara to the Gadigal people. I thank Paddy Garang for sharing her language so that we can now share it with you and in fact renew the oldest recorded language of Australia. But Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council is proud to partner with ICOMOS and more proud to be part of a greater event that honours the greater valuing of culture and heritage, not just for First Nations or Indigenous people or Aboriginal people, but for all people, the value of culture and heritage to all human beings. It's something that we're very proud to be part of. So whilst we acknowledge that in 2020 we can't roll out the events as we planned, we're still very proud to work with ICOMOS to ensure that our community is included and involved in this event. But for tonight, it's about honouring all of those who have been involved in the organisation, all of the logistics in arranging our GA 2020 ICOMOS events, such as tonight, the marker event. So to you all, Bajuri Gamarua, g'day to you all. May you all have a deadly night celebrating the efforts and hard work of all of those involved in preparing our ICOMOS 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. We are delighted to have the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council as a major strategic partner of GA 2020 and that they will be continuing with Australia ICOMOS on our journey to 2023. I acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the country of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. Australia ICOMOS is the host for this marker event. Australia ICOMOS has a very active, enthusiastic and highly skilled membership who were keen to welcome our international colleagues in 2020. If all had gone to plan, the ICOMOS General Assembly and Scientific Symposium, GA 2020, would now be taking place in Sydney, Australia. In fact, we would now be celebrating with you at the fabulous Luna Park on Sydney Harbour's North Shore. Although we are not physically together, it is a great pleasure to share this event. This ICOMOS GA 2020 Marker Event is supported by Australia ICOMOS and sponsored by Tourism Australia, Business Events Sydney and the International Conference Centre Sydney. I particularly thank our strategic partners and especially the Australian and New South Wales governments for their essential support, and our many other strategic partners and corporate patrons whose logos will appear on screen from time to time. To begin, I introduce the organisers of the event. Richard Mackay, AM, is the convener of GA 2020 and also GA 2023. Dr. Ona Velikas is the international co-chair of the GA 2020 Scientific Symposium and joins us from Birmingham in the United Kingdom. Dr. Steve Brown is the Australian co-chair of the GA 2020 Scientific Symposium. Professor Tracy Ireland is the editor of the Australia ICOMOS Journal historic environment and will be the moderator for this marker event. Over to you, Tracy.
Well, thank you very much, Helen. So it's evening in Sydney, Australia right now. So to all of you, good evening, bonsoir et buenas noches. The ICOMOS GA2020 Marker Event is being live streamed from the International Convention Centre here in Sydney, and this is where the GA2020 would have been held. And it's where the GA2023 will be held. We're being broadcast in English with simultaneous translation in French and Spanish. So our event this evening comprises one 45-minute session, followed by a break, a pause café or aperitivo, and then a second 55-minute session. Each session will comprise short presentations from each of the 6 scientific symposium theme co-chairs, followed by a short panel discussion. For our international audience, you have the opportunity to post comments throughout the 2 sessions. Use the speech icon on the top right navigation bar. So let's get started. So first to Ona and Steve, who'll provide some background and their thoughts about the 2020 Scientific Symposium theme of shared cultures, shared heritage, shared responsibility.
Thank you, Tracy. Hello, everyone. The idea of shared was the intended intellectual focus of the ICOMOS 2020 Scientific Symposium. The overarching focus, shared cultures, shared heritage, shared responsibility, which arose from Richard Mackay's 2016 work on the heritage theme of the Australian Government's State of the Environment report, aimed to reflect the global context of heritage as part of cultural identity at a time of rapid population shift, conflict, and environmental uncertainty. The theme recognises that heritage, whether places, landscapes, practices or collections, is frequently connected and valued by multiple and diverse groups and communities. At its core, the theme was to be concerned with the relationships between cultures or cultural groups and their collective responsibility for the care and safeguarding of the significant attributes, meanings, and values of heritage. Ironically, to ask what is shared is almost certain to invite dissent and conflict. The act of sharing raises questions about values, the responses to which can lead to a conflict of interests. Consequently, the idea of shared has diametrically opposing connotations. The commonality of shared value of experience versus the need for forced or arbitrated sharing between arguing parties. The idea of shared was intentionally proposed for the 2020 Scientific Symposium because it is a provocative and complex term. Over to you, Ona.
Thank you, Steve. The GA 2020 Scientific Symposium was divided into 6 themes, exploring the notion of shared from a variety of thematic perspectives. They provide important messages and point to a number of issues and challenges in applying shared to heritage, and especially when done so in a critical way. As you see here, the main themes: shared cultures, shared heritage, shared responsibility, Indigenous heritage, culture nature journey, and marginalized heritage. Amongst these themes, Indigenous heritage and marginalized heritage were particularly significant, as this would have been the first time for a sustained focus on these topics at an ICOMOS Scientific Symposium. Also, the culture nature journey reflects sustained collaborative and shared work of ICOMOS and IUCN in addressing the changes of better integrating cultural and natural heritage. The cross-cutting points primarily reflect the focus areas of ICOMOS working groups, and the topic of digital heritage was also included since there was widespread interest evident in the submissions to the 2020 symposium. Today, we will launch the publication of the historic environment as a legacy of the 2020 General Assembly Scientific Symposium, and we would like to thank the theme co-chairs who contributed to it. We would also like to thank the authors who submitted their abstracts to the symposium. We are planning to publish an online volume of the accepted abstracts by the end of this year. So authors, you will hear from us soon. I will now pass the floor to Tracy.
Thank you, Ona. So in this first session of the Marker event, we will hear about and discuss 3 of the themes of the ICOMOS GA2020 Scientific Symposium. And they are shared cultures, Indigenous heritage, and the culture-nature journey. We begin with the theme of shared cultures. So please welcome to the screen the co-chairs for shared cultures. Dr. Cristina Garduño-Freeman is an academic and practitioner who researches people's connections with places within the fields of architectural history, critical heritage, and digital humanities. Dr. Marco Antonio Chavez Arguello, who joins us from Guadalajara in Mexico, has an academic background in culture and heritage management, psychology, law, music, and virtuality. So the screen is yours, Cristina and Marco.
Hello. I'd like to take this opportunity to describe how Marco and I came to know each other and to work together, to become friends and write collaboratively about heritage, about femicide, and about digital media and social value.
You see, Cristina and I share a multitude of cultures. We met in 2015 while Cristina was visiting her family here in Guadalajara. I had recently returned to Mexico to take up an academic post after many years overseas studying in Barcelona. When we met, we found that despite our distinct backgrounds, me in psychology, music, law, and cultural management, and Cristina in architecture, design, digital media, and social value, but we were both interested in the connections between people and culture.
Of course, we also share a love of Mexican culture, both having been born in that country, with its visceral colours, its dust, its grime, its attitudes, and of course, its unbeatable cuisine. As early career researchers, we shared a scholarly culture of inquisitiveness, of criticality of the present and the changes that were taking place. So, when Marco suggested that we use an Australian theoretical lens to analyse the defacement of an iconic Mexican monument, I immediately said, "Claro que sí." Yes, of course.
Oof. Our paper was drafted and redrafted 16 times as we strove to understand El Ángel de la Independencia and the circumstances that led to its defacement. Of course, we were overly ambitious, and our peer reviewers were quick to highlight precarious ideas and encourage us to be bold with the sound ones. We thank them as it focused the work and generated a unified discourse.
So writing this paper was a live experiment. We worked within digital, temporal, and linguistic shared cultures. The ideas became digital bits, traversing the globe backwards and forwards, making use of the 16-hour time difference between Australia and Mexico. We talked and wrote to each other in English, in Spanish, and of course in Spanglish, inserting words from each language to make ourselves clear, correcting each other's errors. But like most collaborations, it's the conversations that make it interesting. We explored feminicide, human rights violations against women, and bureaucratic complacency, and finally the power of pink glitter, and how social media can give voice to those who are continuously silenced. We see this contribution as a form of academic activism and want to tell the restauradoras con glitter that they were right.
Christina and I want to dedicate this article to all the victims of femicide and feminicide in Mexico, to all their families and friends, to all the people who fight for the protection of the human rights of women. We thank the Restauradoras con Glitter, especially Ayahuitl Estrada and Hilda Pasco Saldaña. Also, thanks to Brian Olasco for the pictures. We offer this article in memoriam to the archaeologist Maria de la Cruz Maricruz Pailles Hernandez, who died earlier this year. Maricruz Pailles was a female pioneer researcher for the field of heritage.
Okay, thank you, Christina and Marco. So the next scientific symposium theme that we will hear about is Indigenous heritage. And this was to be a groundbreaking theme for ICOMOS because it was the first time that such a large attendance of First Nations people was to take place at an ICOMOS scientific symposium. So please welcome to the screen the co-chairs of the Shared Cultures themes. Dr. Chris Wilson is a Ngarrindjeri Kaurna man and is an archaeologist and lecturer in Indigenous archaeology at Flinders University. And Chris joins us from Adelaide in South Australia. Dr. Diane Menzies, Officer of the New Zealand Order of Merit, is Ronyo Whakata Aitanga a Mahaki Māori and has a PhD in resource management and qualifications in landscape architecture, business and mediation. Diane joins us from Auckland in New Zealand. So the screen is yours, Diane.
Good evening, Tracy, and all joining us. I'm going to talk about a contested Indigenous cultural landscape. Ihu Matao is a cultural landscape with significant spiritual dimensions to Māori. An early Polynesian traveller to Aotearoa, New Zealand, 1,000 years ago, landed on the shores of Ihu Matao. And since then, the gardens on rich volcanic soils have fed generations. Despite agreements to protect Māori land in the 1840 founding Treaty of Waitangi, Ihu Matao was stolen by the Crown in 1863. They called it confiscation for deemed opposition to the colonial government. This land was then passed to a settler family who farmed until they sold it to Fletcher Building for speculative housing construction. Save Our Unique Landscapes, a group of Māori cousins from the area, led opposition to Fletcher's and occupied the land for 2 years. One cold night in winter last year, over 100 police arrived to evict them. And this became a lightning rod for Māori trauma and grievances. The Prime Minister asked Fletchers to halt their development, but no agreement has been reached so far for the future of Ihu Matao. This conflict has been one of colonisation and injustice, lack of adequate consultation, and divisive debate over whose narrative is significant. Ironically, the first inscribed World Heritage cultural landscape was Tongariro National Park, protected for Māori spiritual values. There are contested Indigenous cultural landscapes all around the globe. All are important to Indigenous people. The lands are their identity, their future, their heritage. Kia ora koutou, thank you all, and over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Diane and Nina Mani. Diane and I came together through a common understanding around Indigenous heritage narratives for cultural justice, which is the focus of our paper. I'm going to read some of that to you now. So in the paper, we examine the intersections between heritage, Indigenous knowledges and lived experiences, and how these experiences contribute to broader understandings of indigeneity in the global heritage context. So we used interviews and questionnaires in this instance from 4 Indigenous nations, and we explored those Indigenous concepts of heritage across themes of nature culture integration, obligations of caring for country, place attachment and identity. Indigenous heritage narratives for us assist in cross-cultural exchange and provide a critical space to build upon existing knowledge and practices that aim to close the gap in our shared histories of colonisation and dispossession. They are also significant aspects for truth-telling and for shared heritage. Stories told through the lens of Indigenous peoples themselves enable a better understanding of Indigenous cultural landscapes, identity and place attachment. And our position is that through these understandings comes respect, recognition and cultural cohesion that can enable Indigenous peoples to work more collectively and collaboratively with non-Indigenous colleagues for a more resilient future. In this slide, we begin to conceptualise Indigenous ontologies and epistemologies in relation to heritage that link people, place and nature holistically, and Indigenous narratives which assist in intergenerational knowledge transmission. We argue that these are essential to any process of decolonisation in heritage because they place Indigenous voice at the centre of the inquiry. So to summarise, we argue that the intangible and tangible aspects of all Indigenous heritage are woven into ideologies and debates within post-colonial nations that continue to struggle with ideas of nationhood, sovereignty and Indigenous rights. The context and the foundation for Indigenous narratives for us is caring for the land, in which land is central to Indigenous identities and heritage. The ability of nation states to acknowledge these and respect Indigenous identity and heritage accords with what we say in this paper as cultural justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris and Diane, and we look forward to coming back to some of those issues in our panel discussion. So the next scientific symposium theme that we'll hear is that of the nature culture journey. This theme concerned the collaborative work of ICOMOS and the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, IUCN, building on earlier journeys in Hawaii in 2016 and Delhi in 2017. So please welcome to the screen the co-chairs of the Culture Nature Journey. Tim Badman is the director of IUCN's Nature Culture Initiative and the former director of IUCN's World Heritage Programme. And he joins us from Gland in Switzerland, where the headquarters of IUCN. Dr. Susan McIntyre-Tamoy is an international cultural heritage consultant and archaeologist with 30 years of experience, an associate director with Navan Officer Heritage Consultants, and an adjunct professor at James Cook University in Queensland. And she joins us from Ingenuity in Northern Australia. So the screen is yours, Sue.
Thank you, everyone. As Tracy said, I'm speaking from Ingenuity, a remote Aboriginal community, and I acknowledge the ancestors of the people who live here, the Gudang Yadakana people. The Culture Nature Journey targets the artificial divide between nature and culture, which is embedded in many Western concepts that underpin our World Heritage System and flow through to the national heritage systems that derive from it. Journey participants advocate for a holistic management of natural and cultural values, which is increasingly recognised as an important factor in the development of human rights-based and people-focused approaches to conservation. The journey started as a grassroots member response to the work of ICOMOS and IUCN in their first ever formal joint project, the Connecting Practice Project. The journey actually commenced in 2016 at the World Conservation Congress in Hawaii. In 2017, it enthusiastically travelled to Delhi and played a major role in the 19th General Assembly in Delhi, India. Throughout 2018 and 2019, the journey travelled the world with events across 12 countries. So 2020 was shaping up to be an exciting year with a major journey event planned for both the World Conservation Congress in Marseille, France, and the ICOMOS Triennial Assembly in Sydney, Australia. Alas, as we know, all these plans were disrupted by the pandemic. where the Culture Nature Journey continues to build a strong community of practitioners who apply nature culture approaches to their everyday practice. The artwork you see on the slide was selected as a symbolic representation for the Culture Nature Journey at the 2020 GA. Ivimi Utku, Ivimi Alarakudi and Wankamangudi is by Australian Indigenous artist Tio Ropian. He's actually from this community where I am now. It is based on the story of Utku the Imu and Alarakudi the Broga, who in the Dreamtime were two best friends who ultimately betrayed each other through jealousy, partially based on greed or desire to monopolise natural resources on which they both depended. This sounds like a very common narrative in the modern world. The physical and behavioural attitudes of these birds today were shaped by the actions of their Dreamtime ancestors. Just as importantly, the messages conveyed in this story speak to the need to collaborate over the managing and sharing of natural and cultural resources and the consequences of imbalance and greed. Stories such as this are illustrative of how traditional knowledge systems explicitly recognise the active relationships between the actions of human and non-human actors and the consequences that actions have on the natural environment. They are evidence of the way in which traditional information is transmitted through the generations. On our nature journey, as you see on the screen, we learn, we share, and we build strong partnerships and develop new methodologies. Over to you, Tim.
Many thanks to my brilliant co-chair, Sue, and may I thank ICOMOS on behalf of IUCN for this invitation and confirm our commitment and appreciation of the collaboration that's enabled the building of the Culture Nature Journey. The slide that you're seeing that's featured in the new volume of Historic Environment shows the growing network of programs and projects that are recognizing the power that comes from connecting nature and culture. And it's a reality that natural and cultural diversity and our heritage is correlated, both in its richness, but also in the way we see it pressured and being lost. We really need to strive for flourishing diversity of nature and culture in every place. This approach resonates because nature culture is about how real places work. It's about how real people live. And looked at through a nature conservation lens, you could say that cultural sites and practices contribute hugely to conserving nature. For instance, there are as many cultural World Heritage sites protecting globally significant biodiversity areas as there are natural sites. But the connection of nature and culture is much more deeply a question of ethics. We need to act to respect the cultural diversity of humanity in our work across communities, and this includes addressing gender, youth, communities of faith and spirituality, and working in many languages. Nowhere is this more important than in recognising the rights of Indigenous people. Our work on World Heritage shows that unless we challenge conservation practice that separates nature and culture, we exclude Indigenous peoples. So this is a rights issue. It's not just a missed opportunity. We're now seeing growing momentum for partnership. The Culture Nature Journey has been about strengthening collaboration with UNESCO, with ICROM, with the Convention on Biological Diversity, and with many more organisations. But today I want to recognise the collaboration of IUCN and ICOMOS specifically, where this year we've signed a first historic Memorandum of Understanding, and that has a promise to strengthen our work together within it. So allow me to conclude by launching a brand new result of this collaboration, our new online platform, PANORAMA Nature Culture. And PANORAMA is about showcasing solutions. It's an open opportunity to share and communicate what works, and with a new community focused on nature and culture, which goes live today. We have 220 solutions from practice curated and available, and PANORAMA Nature Culture is open to all of you to contribute. So please use it. And please help to build it by sharing your experiences and your solutions. The connection of culture and nature is as old as humanity, but the Culture Nature Journey has only just started. So please bring your ambition, your creativity, and your commitment to the next steps together. Thank you, and let's now celebrate PANORAMA Nature Culture.
So thank you very much, to Tim and Sue. That was very exciting to see the launch of Panorama. I can't wait to have a look. And now we're joined for a panel discussion by our 6 co-chairs. We have Christina and Marco, Diane and Chris, and of course Sue and Tim. And we have had the opportunity to have a look at some of the questions that you have been lodging online over the last few days. And they've raised a broad range of issues, but there's been some quite consistent themes emerging through the questions lodged online. Quite a common topic that's raised is heritage ethics. And I wanted to start with this notion of heritage ethics and the concept of decolonisation. I noted that Chris and Diane don't use the term decolonisation in their work, and they focus more on this concept of cultural justice. So I wanted to ask Diane, what role do you think organisations like ICOMOS can take in working with First Nations groups towards aims of cultural social justice and the decolonisation of heritage ethics and practices? Can ICOMOS be a part of the solution, or is it still part of the problem in terms of embedded structural racism, or what Gayatri Spivak calls epistemic violence?
Thank you, Tracy. This is my opinion. I'm not speaking on behalf of First Nations, of course, or not even my tribe. But I think ICOMOS could assist First Nations. And firstly, I point to the World Heritage nomination process, and ICOMOS could better assist First Nations there, and also with the categories of that have nature and culture separately listed. And just following on from what Tim said, they could be brought much more closely together, and they would better then reflect First Nations values as well. And also new categories perhaps, such as for ancestral landscapes. They could bring First Nations together throughout UNESCO in the different groups, such as ones in IUCN, and that would enable First Nations to engage amongst themselves. But in doing that, they would need to do that respectfully, to do it with integrity, to develop relationships, and do it for the long haul. And if they didn't do that, well, yes, they may be just recolonising.
Great. Thanks so much, Diane. So Chris, let's turn to you and explore your experience in Ngarrindjeri Kaurna values and knowledge, or Ghana, I should say, apologise. How have your values, Ngarrindjeri Kaurna values, changed heritage and archaeological practice in your region, or has heritage practice remained resistant to that change?
Thanks, Tracy. So I guess I'm speaking from the position of a relatively, new member of the Ngarrindjeri community in learning about culture and heritage. And the heritage regimes which have existed in South Australia before that, have been detrimental for communities. So the legislations and policies that existed before, even the ones that exist now, in some regards, don't enable the Ngarrindjeri or Ghana or other communities in South Australia to really engage in philosophies around, culture and caring for country. So I guess for my community, Ruā is the term we use for land, body and spirit. And so when you're thinking about that, the connection between the country, our bodies and, the way in which we can practice that, access to our cultural landscapes are really important for us. So I engage in those landscapes as both a Ngarrindjeri person, but as an archaeologist. So they come, I guess, walking in two different worlds for me. So yeah, that's my response for that.
Great. Thanks so much, Chris. That was great. So another popular theme that came through in the questions was those of digital heritage and digital contexts for heritage. And so now I want to turn to Christina. And Christina, your work has shown how important digital contexts have become for advocacy, activism and activation of heritage. Do these activities not only impact traditional forms of heritage, but perhaps also give rise to new forms of digital heritage with distinctive types of heritage values?
Look, I think what's really interesting about the way that communities and practitioners are using digital heritage is that it's become integrated and dispersed across action and practice and monuments. And in that sense, the heritage values now become moments, if you like, digital moments, and the significance inevitably is transformed. So something, a frivolous decoration like pink glitter, becomes a powerful symbol of a feminist movement through a series or a network of digital kind of instances across the web.
It's such a powerful example, Christina, and it made such an impression on me when I first read your and Marco's paper. It's you know, a unique example, I think, but brought to life by your insightful critique. So let's go to Marco now. So Marco, your compelling example of El Angel showed how communities spontaneously organised using institutional heritage monuments and digital platforms to bring a negative or difficult example of shared culture in Mexico into the light of the public spotlight. So is the digital realm changing the cultural values of institutional heritage?
Well, first, thank you for your question, Tracy. Sorry I crashed before, but well, to answer your question, I see that in our case, as you mentioned, digital media was used to spread a difficult shared culture by spreading new symbols of a social movement. In this case, as Christina said, pink glitter and graffiti, denouncing the femicides and feminicides in Mexico. So we see that digital media have multiple possibilities, also applied to heritage research. I believe that we as researchers have to be open enough to see how these new tools for communication are being used in relation to the social value of heritage and sharing culture. Thank you, Tracy. Muchas gracias. Merci beaucoup. And by the way, greetings from Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico.
Thank you, Marco. That was fantastic. So I'm going to turn quickly to Sue and Tim. And Sue, there's been a lot of hype over the last year about how digital contexts, communications and experiences of heritage online can provide more ethical and sustainable and less environmentally impactful experiences of heritage. So what has the last year reinforced for you, Sue, about the affordances and experiences of being in place? And how does this intersect with the nature culture journey?
Thanks for the question, Tracy. Well, my answer to that is cast your mind back, everyone, to those early weeks of the pandemic. You probably remember that first, oh, wow, feeling when you've got that first Facebook or email link to a virtual tour of a famous museum or archaeological site. However, months of Zoom meetings, webinars, online, seminars, virtual tours have taken the sort of toy shine, the new toy shine off that mode of engaging with heritage places. Digital technologies undoubtedly have an important role to play in terms of preserving vibrant archives and providing increased accessibility. But they can't replicate that magical, nuanced experience provided by the real site in its social, cultural and natural context. That sense of place that comes with the smells, the textures, the personal interactions. Perhaps more importantly than that, while all those other things that you say are true and technology can do those things, it is also easier to present a one-sided or whitewashed version of history and heritage places if we only experience them digitally. So we can visit the World Heritage Site without even being confronted by the poverty in the community that's right on its doorstep. Of course, I'm not saying we're anti-digital. In the nature cultural journey, we too are looking at utilising digital technologies. For example, the PANORAMA Nature Culture that Tim was talking about. But in integrating culture and nature in site management methodologies, we're very conscious that our heritage places need to be experienced in all their complexity and that people and their rights and needs are very much part of that. So I guess there's a cautious sort of acceptance that it's here to stay and it has a place, but maybe it's not everything.
Great. Thanks so much, Sue. And let's turn to Tim now. And Tim, you've explained to us so clearly how the nature culture journey is working towards building dialogue between humanities and science-based approaches to culture and the environment. And this also challenges the division between notions of tangible and intangible heritage, as you mentioned. So can you say a little more about how culture-nature approaches might contribute to breaking down this current division in World Heritage practices?
Well, thanks for the question. I think when Sue was presenting, she indicated how the culture-nature journey, and it's about challenging false dichotomies and the separation of nature and culture. But it does seem that one of the things I guess I've learned in that discussion is that the tangible and intangible kind of labels are a different sort of false dichotomy that often get in the way of good results. And I think the approach, yes, it's about scientific approaches, but it's also about practice-based approaches. And I think when you go to the field or go to the ground, the separations that we maybe see causing problems are much more readily capable of being challenged, because we can see in the real world, those separations are exposed by the real lived experiences. I think specifically, though, that the lens of nature and the nature-culture connection is a good way to try to challenge this issue of tangible and intangible that you're raising, because certainly in the nature-culture work, it's not about only tangible heritage. Yes, maybe in World Heritage we have some of those tensions, but the nature culture journey has absolutely been about opening those, all the relationships. And certainly, nature depends. Nature conservation results in culturally managed places depend on traditional practices and intangible relationships just as much as they do around understanding the physical relationships that form the heritage. So I think the biocultural heritage of places is absolutely a concept that links together nature and tangible and intangible heritage, and I think the whole approach just helps us to push back against these labels, always defined in my mother tongue, in the decades of conservation practice, that get in the way of good results in real places with communities.
Great, thanks so much, Tim. That was a really interesting answer and expansion on the ideas that you and Sue raised in your papers. And I think there were some quite strong threads coming out from all of your responses. I think you all have mentioned the importance of practice-led research and learning and theorising our experiences of being in the field, working with communities, learning from the communities, and how that can be a driver for innovation in heritage practice and theory. And it was interesting that all of the papers, from the digital to the nature culture journey to Indigenous heritage concepts deeply embedded in communities, I think this importance of people-focused methods and practice-led research has come through very strongly. So having this wonderful panel discussion has made me feel a little bit sad that we're not all here in person and having a lovely conversation, and can now retire to have a drink together. But thank you all very much, panellists, for your presentations and a brilliant discussion. So we'll now take our 5-minute break for coffee for those of you in cold northern areas, and perhaps a petit aperitif for us here in Sydney, as the sun is well and truly over the yardarm here. For those of you who are registered audience members, please do not log out, but keep your link to the event open. And please do rejoin us in 5 minutes for session number 2 of the ICOMOS GA2020 Marker Event. Thank you. So, welcome to this second session of the ICOMOS GA2020 Marker Event. So this session will run for 55 minutes and will include the launch of the special GA2020 Legacy Volume of Historic Environment, the announcement of the proposed GA2023 themes, a message from the ICOMOS President Toshi Kono, and the first ever screening of the promotional video for GA2023. So let's get started with the second session. So we'll hear about and discuss three further themes of the scientific symposium: shared responsibility, marginalised heritages, and shared heritage. We'll begin with the theme of shared responsibility. So please welcome to the screen the co-chairs of this theme. Dr. McLaren North is Managing Director of Extent Heritage, one of Australia's largest heritage consulting firms. And he joins us from Hartley in regional New South Wales. And Mac has worked in both the public and private sectors in archaeology and heritage management, particularly with industrial and infrastructure heritage. And Susan McDonald is Head of Buildings and Sites at the Getty Conservation Institute, and she joins us from Los Angeles. And a special thank you for the late night or early morning, Susan. Susan works internationally on research, practice and training across various aspects of conservation, including historic urban environments, built and archaeological heritage. So the screen is yours, Susan.
Thank you, Tracy. Good morning, everyone. The first decades of the century have seen a notable shift in the practice of heritage management from the international to local levels in response to greater recognition of the contribution that heritage and its conservation makes to economic, social, cultural, and environmental development. Changes in heritage governance has also catalysed this shift. For example, in many parts of the world, we're seeing a reduction in government services for awareness raising, standard setting and technical support, concentrating its role in the legislative arena. Other external vectors affecting roles and responsibilities that we identified in the many submissions to our theme included human rights, equity and inclusion, climate change, urbanisation and rural decline, to name but a few. Recognition for heritage as a public good and shifts in governance have expanded the number of parties involved, changed their roles and the ways responsibilities are now shared. Once largely driven by government, key advisory bodies in the academy, action and leadership are increasingly coming from the private, the non-profit sectors, from local communities and other stake and rights holder groups, either collectively or individually. Greater responsibility and a greater flexibility of roles is increasingly the model, and this has many benefits. And we're seeing a number of new and creative models for shared responsibility emerging. This theme sought to explore the longer-term practical implications of this shift towards shared responsibility and investigate how it's affecting conservation and management outcomes for heritage places and their communities. How does this network of players now organise, cooperate and act to protect and conserve and celebrate and interpret heritage in ways that contribute to a sustainable world? I shared this image of Bagan in Myanmar. It's a country greatly affected by climate change, human rights issues, and as a struggling emerging democracy, managing pressure for sustainable development in a new free market economic context. As is today the case in many places, success and failure for heritage management is intimately woven with addressing the greater societal challenges. Bagan is subject to a raft of macro-level threats from climate change, earthquakes, development. This is an example of heritage at the crossroads. A multi-pronged approach is needed, involving players willing to share responsibilities across individual and collective efforts in order to manage not just the site, but to provide economic opportunities for local communities and ultimately meet countries' aspirations for sustainable futures. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. The theme of shared responsibility has challenged traditional views of the role of heritage experts. these not always positive perceptions of expertise can complicate future relations between heritage stakeholders, and sharing responsibilities needs to occur in a manner which can add value to the experiences and goals of the other stakeholders, rather than expertise as being viewed as an exclusionary process. Regulatory approaches have taken us only so far, and as governments pull back from a leadership role, the importance of sharing responsibilities among a wider range of stakeholders becomes critical. Some stakeholder groups will have a range of concerns, of which heritage is only one, and perhaps not the most important. Groups may lack capacity in terms of heritage management and may be concerned with more day-to-day matters such as welfare, employment, or larger issues of sovereignty and self-determination. As practitioners, we need to be less afraid of having to take a step back from the process and allow other stakeholders to work out how and when we can re-engage. This is not going to be something we can dictate, and we cannot assume old models necessarily remain valid. Turning to the site of Uluru in Central Australia, this is a prime example of a site with shared responsibility. While this site was handed back to the ENG people in 1985, it was not until 2019 that the ENG were able to stop the culturally inappropriate practice of the climbing of Uluru, demonstrating the tensions inherent between in shared responsibility for management of this important place. I happened to be in Central Australia in October 2019. It was disappointing to see that even up until the very last minute, climbers continued to climb over the objections of the ENG. The tension over this practice also shows the danger of the over-reliance on tourism for economic stimulus and the potential for unintended consequences and dependencies, which may arise when there is a void in tourism numbers from events such as COVID. Shared responsibilities is based on a recognition of wider perspectives and aims for heritage places in a manner which respects and acknowledges the interests of all parties. This large group of papers submitted to the GA will continue to develop over the next 3 years, and we look forward to seeing what people have to say in GA 2023. Thank you.
So thank you so much to Susan and Mac, and thanks, Mac, for persisting with your difficult connection. We heard you loud and clear, and I look forward to coming back to some of those issues in our panel discussion session. So the next theme that we'll turn to is about marginalised heritages. And this theme has a particular focus on the heritages of women, LGBTQI+, and religious and ethnic minority communities. So please welcome to the screen the co-chairs of the marginalised heritage theme. Dr. Toki Leoton-Brown works as a heritage architect and cultural economist with Merging Ecologies and joins us from New York. And thank you again, Toki, for the difficult time zone. So Toki's also on the executive committee of the Association of Critical Heritage Studies. And Dr. James Lesh researches urban history and heritage conservation at the University of Melbourne, and he's particularly interested in the history and theory of conservation, the relationship between conservation and development, and the conservation of marginalised and everyday heritage places in cities. So the screen is yours, James.
Thanks, Tracy. So an objective for the marginalised heritage stream, and was reflected in many of the papers as well, was to firstly think about how we more broadly think about heritage places, and secondly, consider the people-centred methodologies we can use to understand and safeguard them. By people or human-centred conservation, I'm putting forth a refreshed mode for heritage practice, which foregrounds people's historical, contemporary, and potentially even future relationships to heritage places in how we assess, manage, and interpret those same places. So pictured here on this slide are 3 LGBTQI heritage places where historical and contemporary community attachment and experiences come to the fore. And these are sites in Melbourne, where I am now, London, and New York. So the top left is Val's Cafe of early 1950s Melbourne, which was once a gay-friendly meeting place at a time when few such public spaces for queer people existed to meet in cities anywhere in the world. The bottom left is London. It's Kennington Park in 1987. It's a photo of belonging to the Jewish gay group marching at London Pride, a significant and ongoing social ritual in tangible heritage. And this photo was taken at an important moment for British gay and lesbian politics, involving protest against Prime Minister Thatcher's Clause 28 proposition. Finally, there's a contemporary photo from New York, from the federal landmarked Stonewall Inn. the only site of the three, which still physically exists in the sense of a traditional heritage place. I mean, Stonewall has relative integrity compared to the other two, certainly, allowing to an extent the application of traditional conservation practice. But it also has ongoing and clear social significance as a site of continuing political protest. So considering these kinds of three sites together in a frame allows us to connect trans-urban heritage places belonging to the LGBTQI community, and to also consider how they are significant places for all humankind, for their role in advancing equity and rights for all. In each context, there are evolving heritage processes, practices and doctrines associated. Authorities and organisations and cities across the world are leading these. And each of these places complicate conventional heritage practices and processes, bringing together tangible and intangible features where cultural significance continues to evolve. So in summary, people-centred conservation forces us to consider the ways in which heritage professionals and LGBTQI communities can continue to work together to develop meaningful ways of advancing heritage into the future.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Tracy. Hello? Okay. All right, okay. So I'll be talking about Stone Town in Zanzibar City, which was inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List in 2000, and one of the best preserved examples of shared heritage on the Swahili coast. The marginalization of the Stone Town women has dramatically affected their heritage practices. The honoring of their complex spatial, cultural factors means that women in Stone Town regard space and privacy as heritage value. The tangible heritage of Stone Town is also under pressure due to poor restoration practices. This allowed the women to become members of a group which they named Reclaim Women's Heritage, and now seek to reclaim previous women's sites around the Swahili coast that has been readapted for the tourism sector. The picture that is supposed to be there is the Amani baths were designed for the women of the island every other week. As an Islamic island, gender roles developed in a distinct way. The separation of sexes, which still exists in the country today. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much to Toki and James. And this is quite a logistically complicated and complex event, and everybody's doing a fantastic job. So huge virtual round of applause for everybody involved. I think the messages are coming through. So the final scientific symposium theme that we'll hear about in this session is shared heritage. So please welcome to the screen the co-chairs Kai Weiser, who's president of ICOMOS Nepal and joins us from Kathmandu. He researches post-disaster rehabilitation of urban heritage and relationships between communities. Kai's been working as a planner and architect in the Himalayan region. And Agnieszka Kira. Agnieszka's professional experience includes work as a specialist at the National Authority for Conservation of Cultural Property in Poland, for UNESCO on the survey of vernacular architecture of the Basra region in Iraq, and at the City of Fremantle, Western Australia, as the City Heritage Architect. So the screen is yours, Agnieszka.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. As we already heard, the concept of shared heritage is usually associated with physical sites and the related intangible heritage. More often than not, shared heritage is also associated with conflicting rather than shared values, the roots of which typically go back centuries or even millennia without being heard. The challenges of technological advancement, migration, and globalization further disconnect communities from their past, rendering the traditional practices irrelevant and heritage places abandoned or even destroyed. So it's important to nurture those instances where links between heritage places and people continue, and where the accumulated narratives grow deeper and more meaningful. One of two cases presented in Kai and my paper in Historic Environment concerns Arterhead in Fremantle, Western Australia, an example of shared value reconciled. The complex history of Arterhead recognizes Noongar traditional owners who used the headland at the mouth of Swan River for trading and ceremonies. The 1829 arrival of European settlers, and a thriving fishing industry built by the ethnic communities of Fremantle. Sadly, it also involved the gradual exploitation, part destruction, and neglect of what ultimately became the Fremantle Ports Depot. It is before the city of Fremantle embarked on the 28-year-long strategic project involving reconstruction of the original 1870s coastal landscape and cultural site. My slides demonstrate this story looking from the bottom right and up and around. Arterhead demonstrates the importance of three critical components to achieving full benefits of shared heritage: the ongoing political commitment, sound strategic economic planning, and the value-based conservation approach. The former wasteland, restored as Arterhead A-class reserve, has reconnected people to their past, reinforcing their pride and identity, and, most of all, becoming a much-loved public reserve and cultural site of diverse meanings and shared values. Today, events associated with past conflicts, such as Australia Day and Reconciliation Day, both take place on the reserve, thus demonstrating that it has become a living landscape where shared values create an evolving community cohesion. Very importantly, the reserve shared heritage is celebrated not as a museum or an exhibit, but as integral part of the urban fabric of the evolving port city. Thank you. Over to you, Kai.
Thank you, Agnieszka. And greetings from Kathmandu. Kathmandu, the capital city of Nepal, was named after the Kasta Mandap, the monument shown on image 1. The Kasta Mandap is a mandap or sattel, a timber pavilion which was used as a rest house, a community hall, or might have even been a city hall. The monument doesn't have a specific function or owner. It has been a monument shared by various communities and stakeholders. The Kasta Mandap collapsed during the 2015 Gorkha earthquake, and the local communities demanded that it be rebuilt using traditional technology and materials as shown on image 2. Research carried out by Durham and Stirling universities showed the monument to be several centuries older than assumed. The foundations were from the 7th century, and the timber bracket was even dated to the 5th century CE. The monument is being rebuilt with community participation. Image 3 shows the community helping carry the main posts to the site with the blessing of the living goddess Kumari. Image 4 shows the regional member of parliament standing with the head carpenter and head mason at a special ritual to protect the monument. Various communities have laid claim to the Kasta Mandap over its 1,300-year history, and it would have been this that ensured its survival. A continuity plan is being prepared for maintenance and management after its reconstruction, taking into account the related communities, the stakeholders. Continuity of a site or monument depends on keeping the balance between communities as shared heritage. Thank you.
So thank you very much to Kai and Agnieszka for your final, quite poignant examples, I think, of this theme of shared heritage. And so now we're going to commence once again our panel discussion, and I'm joined by Susan and Mac, Toki and James, and of course Kai and Agnieszka. And reflecting again on some of the questions that were lodged online in response to the themes of our event, the themes of economics and heritage and sustainability in heritage have been a constant refrain and coming up in quite diverse circumstances. So I thought we'd start first with the concept of the economic value of heritage, or the flip side, heritage's contribution to the economy. And I feel that over the last 10 years or so, we're being constantly pressured to either quantify in dollar terms the cultural values of heritage, or on the other side, to find novel ways of measuring heritage's cultural contribution to the community in terms of well-being. I've been particularly interested to read lately a book that's recently been translated from French into English by Luc Boltanski and Anand Esker called The Enrichment Economy, which looks at heritage as a novel response from capitalism in terms of, in late capitalism, a new way of managing values. I think it has some quite provocative examples. So Mac, to come to you first, in your paper you mentioned this fascinating new area of fourth sector organisations, and that is organisations that are social mission oriented but are for-profit businesses, as opposed to third sector traditional not-for-profit organisations. So I wondered, what do you think are the ethical dimensions of these types of new organisations, and how might an organisation like ICOMOS interact with them into the future?
Thanks, Tracy. I suppose it's a question of examining how the mission of these social purpose organizations align with the heritage and conservation goals that ICOMOS or another group of stakeholders might be supporting. Not necessarily all organizations will be aligned on all goals, so there may be certain alliances that will work better than others. I also think it's necessary for those of us from the heritage world to not be afraid of the idea that heritage might actually be exploited for some kind of economic benefit. I mean, we see it happen through tourism, but again, it is this question of sustainability and what are the outcomes that we are seeking from these relationships, and making sure that that's clear up front so that neither party feels that they've either been exploited or deceived. Thanks.
Great, great. Thank you very much, Mac. That was a really interesting response. So let's turn to the question, these broad questions about sustainability, and I want to come to you, Susan. So in some nations, like the United States and Australia, we've recently seen business corporations enacting far more proactive changes around addressing climate change and carbon emissions than governments. Governments which have remained tied to existing business models. So do you think there's a role for these fourth sector organisations in working towards sustainability goals in conjunctions with organisations like ICOMOS, or indeed the organisation that you work for, Susan?
Thanks, Tracy. And I think that's exactly the point, really, that the catalyst for the fourth sector has been to act where there's a void that's being left by government, and also a recognition that we can't keep asking the third sector to increasingly, deliver, and also recognising that the private sector is market driven. And so that's really the point of the fourth sector. But it also, I think, provides opportunities for organisations to benefit financially from their contribution to these greater societal goods, including the sustainability goals of which heritage can contribute and is very much a part. And I think particularly for Indigenous and rights stakeholder groups, it provides an opportunity for them to benefit economically from the work and the stewardship or the action or leadership that they're actually taking. And I think the fourth sector can be inherently more nimble and flexible, so they can offer services to address some of the sustainability goals that the private sector or even the third sector might have difficulty doing. And so there is a role for ICOMOS working alongside these institutions, but I think, we're really talking about practical things on the ground here. And so I think there's a role for these sectors all to be working together, and that really is increasingly the model, these cross-sectoral partnerships with 2 or 3 different or even 4 different sectors now sometimes working together.
Great. Thanks, Susan, and thank you to you and Mac for your fantastically wide-ranging analysis that will appear in our forthcoming volume. So I'm going to turn now to Toki, and reading your and James's paper, Toki, on these quite poignant examples of marginalised communities, it really drew out the question, I think, around how there might be a tension between human rights-based approaches to heritage and values-based approaches to heritage, such as we see embedded in a range of doctrine like the Australia ICOMOS Borough Charter. Can you reflect a little bit on that question, Toki?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Tracy. Well, the issue with the values-based approach to cultural heritage is predicated on the basic premise that in order to recognize a particular structure or place, it first has to identify why its heritage is important. Who is also involved in identifying this? So who is actually valuing this? Whereas with the rights-based approach to respect, protect and fulfill the rights of cultural heritage for individuals and communities by promoting rights-based approach in its work, a common with the example of our common dignity that gives voice and acknowledgement to marginalized heritage communities and supports the continuous generation of alternative views and multiple heritage perspectives.
Great. Thanks so much for that really clear answer, Toki. And you expressed that with such conviction around the centrality of the human rights based approaches, just based on this very simple context of respect and dignity. Thank you for that. I'm going to turn now to James and come back a little to the issue of sustainability. And I know, James, that you've been increasingly thinking about expanding conceptions and alignments between sustainability and heritage. So talk to us a little bit about how we can align objectives of social, economic and environmental sustainability with conservation, particularly in reference to marginalised and diverse communities.
Sure, thanks, Tracy. And before I get to the question, to answering the question, I wanted to first say that authorship for the marginalised heritage paper on Stonetown rests with Toki rather than me. So I'm going to give credit where credit's due.
Thanks.
But to move on to the question, in my mind, heritage, yes, it certainly does have greater potential to become fundamental to sustainability in a range of facets. But that really requires heritage and the work that we do to embrace the cultural values of the future alongside those of the past. So as it stands, we generally think of society, economy and the environment often as potentially broader benefits of heritage or those that come with heritage. But each of those factors in some ways need to be negotiated against the traditional values of conservation to some degree. But how do we start to think about putting investment, and particularly our reality that we're in the Anthropocene, far more central to decision-making and the managing of places? So we're going to have to start thinking about issues of time, of community, of authenticity, of the integrity of heritage places to align with all those. And I'd probably suggest people-centred, values-based conservation has a role too. I think there are some risks. We're going to have to accept and embrace a greater degree of uncertainty and complexity, and continue to recognise the impossibility of rationalised pseudoscientific approaches to wholly embracing cultural value. Rather, what we do is approximate. So in relation to LGBTQI sites particularly, we know historically, and I say this as a historian, the LGBTQI social movements are linked to economic justice movements and environmental movements. But how do we bring these really interesting historical links back into the stewardship of these places for the future? So by starting to ask these questions, I think we can then begin to start developing and then hopefully adopting more contemporary and more relevant approaches for addressing sustainability through heritage in the many facets of sustainability.
Great, thanks so much, James. I'm going to move quickly on to Kai, and your example of the Kastamandup in Nepal was a compelling example, Kai, of unresolved and ongoing contestations around community use and values of that place. So does heritage management necessarily need to resolve such tensions to ensure a sustainable future for this place, or do these contestations have a role in highlighting and maybe even addressing broader social issues?
Thank you for this very important question, particularly because I think we really still need to understand what community really is. And we sort of talk about community participation often without attempting to really accept the complexities that go with it. And not in all cases, but we see that it's a challenge in many places. So even in Kastamandup, the communities have changed over the centuries, reflecting sort of the local circumstances. And for example, with the earthquake response phase, there were actually new communities that came in and took certain responsibilities. So how do we deal with this in connection with management? And I think what we're trying to look at here is trying to ensure continuity. And I think that's, again, we're trying to understand what are we actually trying to do here. So continuity for both tangible and intangible aspects of the monument. So we've called the plan that we're preparing a continuity plan, which means you sort of monitor the safety and security of the monument itself, but also the users. And the plan also sort of facilitates the community involvement. And for example, ensuring accessibility, but it has to be sort of linked to sort of specific relationships of the community to the monument. So we need to understand it at that level. But of course, we also have to account for that this changes over time. So we have to keep adapting it. So I think this deeper understanding of community is required. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Kai. And this tension that you draw out between change and continuity is a really interesting theme in this work. And now I'm going to turn to you, Agnieszka, and come back to finish the panel on another question about economics of heritage and how should we measure heritage's contribution to the economy? Should it be only in terms of the dollars generated for business, or should public policy be adopting mechanisms to measure the social contribution to well-being and other community goods? And is this feasible in culturally diverse contexts?
Well, thank you, Tracy. This is the subject very close to my heart, because for years I argued with developers that they are the only one delivering economic benefits in increased employment and upgrading the areas and so on, while the regulators, like me, argued benefits of heritage conservation in terms of well-being of the community or saving the energy and so on. Yet I am passionate about the economic benefits of heritage-driven development, not only of individual places, but areas or even cities. In my experience, this is the only way to achieve long-term sustainable development of the city through a large number of private owners' investment into their capital. Obviously, I am speaking from the experience because Fremantle of 1970s was a very dilapidated area, and in the last 30 years, it became the most attractive and viable part of the city center. And I am sure that Fremantle is not the only one. I now live in Balmain, and not knowing much about its history, I can see that the benefits of long-term heritage investment in heritage conservation. Obviously, the government has a critical role in ensuring that there are economic benefits through heritage-driven development, mainly by providing legal and planning framework to make heritage conservation possible, but also by leading for an example. And again, my favorite example of Fremantle, it was the city of Fremantle who invested in conserving its heritage places which were owned by the city. And this provided stimulus to other businesses around to do the same, to follow by example. And yet the large developments are still prevailing, at least in WA, and they usually, because they are large scale, they cause a lot of disruption, and the outcomes, social outcomes or economic outcomes, are not remain uncertain. And City of Perth is probably one of the best examples because
we need to finish up now.
Okay, the heritage of City of Perth have been practically destroyed, and for many years it remained like a concrete jungle. And it's only in the last decade that the City of Perth is trying to address that issue.
Thanks so much, Agnieszka, for that great response to that question of heritage as a driver of economic contributions to society. So, look, well done, panel members. We did it again. Big virtual round of applause to everybody. I think we're getting quite a bit better at this as we go along. So I really enjoyed that discussion and lots of food for thought. And I think that will take us into the next section now. And so now I'd like to invite Nargiz Atuganova to provide some reflections and comment here on the presentations and panel discussions. So the screen is yours, Nargiz.
Dear colleagues, the diversity of the concept of shared heritage that we witnessed today is amazing. It is complex and inspiring, and at the same time it is provocative. However, it seems that the concept of sharing always accompanies cultures and societies in their interactions with each other, and sometimes it is not obvious what cultures the heritage sites are representing, as it was highlighted in the shared cultures presentation. Of course, this moment always causes vital questions related to the conservation and management of such heritage sites. However, the concept of sharing comes again to assist in addressing these issues, as it was presented by the shared heritage co-chairs. The diverse communities come together for conservation and re-identification of special places. In this context, the theme of shared responsibility emerges. We notice that the four sectors that are currently involved in heritage practice, that is public and private sector, non-profit sector, and social business, are currently changing the interaction between them all over the world and becoming more open to indigenous and local communities. Collaborative partnerships are also strengthening in the culture-nature journey. We can now celebrate the IUCN and ICOMOS Memorandum of Understanding and see how the integration of nature cultures in the field of heritage is gaining momentum year by year. It would be impossible to imagine the topic of sharing without indigenous heritage. It might be surprising how this concept could be perceived differently, not only by diverse indigenous communities, custodians of their heritage, but also by different heritage practices and regulations at national and international levels. And finally, the Marker event has raised the theme of marginalized heritage, which is an important milestone to start the discussion of this heritage phenomena that fights for its recognition on global, national, and local levels of heritage practices all over the world. In the end, it's necessary to highlight one more dimension of shared heritage. Heritage places and heritage practices are shared by different generations. Sometimes the vision of different generations for any one heritage place may be dramatic and variable. As shown in the slide, you can see a dancer standing on his hands and looking to the Kazan Kremlin World Heritage Site in Russia. Metaphorically and literally, the dancer sees this cultural property from an upside-down perspective. However, I guess this new different vision of a youth is indeed an advantage in heritage practices. For instance, during recent COVID-19 lockdowns, the young and emerging professionals took a leading role in the identification of heritage-related issues and took this opportunity to organize numerous online capacity-building events across ICOMOS, national and scientific committees, bringing together heritage professionals in times of social distancing. This trend has allowed young heritage professionals to better integrate into heritage practice in all levels, starting as local volunteers and progressing into the ICOMOS Emerging Professionals Working Group. Such a situation was unimaginable and I would say undiscussable even 10 years ago. Increasing youth participation illustrates the most important feature of heritage. It is changing. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Nargiz. And it was wonderful to hear your comments from the perspective of an emerging professional and from the Emerging Professionals Working Group. And of course, the voices of youth and of emerging professionals was to have been a major feature of the ICOMOS GA 2020. And we hope, of course, to promote this perspective going forward. And I think the point you raised about heritage being shared between generations was a particularly important one. I know in my work, I'm often working with heritage organisations which have ageing demographics and wondering how to involve new volunteers and younger folk, and often doing it by trying to engage younger people in what they're already doing, rather than perhaps listening to what it is that engages the younger generation about those places, such as Nargiz has so powerfully pointed out to us. So now it's my great privilege to call on Mikel Lander, President of the ICOMOS Advisory Committee and an officer of the ICOMOS Scientific Council, to launch the special GA 2020 volume of Historic Environment. So the screen is yours, Mikel.
Thank you, Tracy. It is a great pleasure for me to launch the special GA 2020 legacy issue of Historic Environment. It's not common to have published papers from an ICOMOS scientific symposium while the actual event was taking place, but it never has happened before during an event supposed to be taking place in the case of Sydney. Historic Environment is the referred journal of Australia ICOMOS. It brings together dynamic, critical, interdisciplinary research in the field of heritage conservation. This special issue of Historic Environment emerged from the desire to recognize and record the work undertaken to create and organize the ICOMOS 2020 General Assembly and Scientific Symposium. The volume was edited by Steve Brown and Ona Vilakis, the Scientific Symposium co-chairs, and comprises an introductory paper by the editors and 6 theme papers. The publication is supported by the Getty Conservation Institute. The volume includes an extensive list of acknowledgements recognizing the many individuals, committees, strategic partners, and corporate patrons who made substantive contributions to what was to have been GA 2020. This edited volume contributes to the work of ICOMOS Scientific Symposium by facilitating and promoting intellectual leadership in cultural heritage management. It also reflects ICOMOS goals with regard to information exchange and multidisciplinary approaches to heritage conservation. So, without further ado, I'm delighted to officially launch the GA 2020 Legacy issue of Historic Environment. The volume is now available as a free download from the Australia ICOMOS website.
Thank you, Mikel. Well, we are coming to an end, and it's now our task to announce the proposed themes for the ICOMOS 2023 General Assembly and Scientific Symposium that will be held in Sydney, Australia, from the 21st of August to the 9th of September in 2023. These themes you will see next to me proposed, and we hope it will be formally endorsed by the ICOMOS Scientific Council at the meeting on the 26th of October this year. The proposed overarching theme for the ICOMOS GA 2023 Scientific Symposium is Heritage Changes. The GA 2023 theme seeks to examine the changes taking place in the first years of the 2020s. Climate emergencies, COVID-19, lockdowns, closed borders, virtual meetings, and the Black Lives Matter movement have profoundly altered the ways in which the world is experienced. We ask, what is changing in the field of heritage and what needs to change? And what does heritage change? For example, in civil society, the environment, the economy, and in politics? Steve, your turn.
And if heritage changes, then Ona, I want to see you in Sydney for GA 2023. But meanwhile, the four themes proposed for the GA 2023 Scientific Symposium are resilience, responsibility, rights, relationships. These themes have been chosen to cover a broad range of topics and matters of concern in the work of cultural heritage research, protection and management. We encourage everyone to begin thinking about sessions and papers for the GA 2023 Scientific Symposium. To help inspire you to attend GA 2023, we will show a promotional video for ICOMOS GA 2023 from Sydney.
Australia ICOMOS is proud to be hosting the 21st Triennial General Assembly and Scientific Symposium of ICOMOS, which will be held here in Sydney in 2023. This is the first time that a Triennial General Assembly has been held in the Asia-Pacific region, and we look forward to welcoming ICOMOS members and delegates from all around the world as we travel together on our journey to Sydney in 2023. GA 2023 is strongly supported by the Australian Government, the New South Wales State Government, the City of Sydney, and a wide range of strategic partners and corporate patrons.
The Australian Government is proud to be a major strategic partner of the ICOMOS General Assembly, which will be hosted in Sydney in September 2023. As an active member of the World Heritage Committee over recent years, Australia continues to extend its global leadership in heritage conservation practice. Australia has been a strong supporter of World Heritage with 20 unique World Heritage sites, and with more put forward, the protection of our World Heritage sites will continue to play an important role into the future.
There is widespread enthusiasm for a General Assembly in Australia, reflecting our multicultural society and the universal nature of the ICOMOS global community. Sydney is on the traditional lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and and we acknowledge their elders, past and present, and extend our respects to all Indigenous people who might join us in Sydney in 2023. Australia ICOMOS members are represented on every international scientific committee and will welcome the chance to host their colleagues in Sydney. The proposed scientific symposium theme, Heritage Changes, reflects the tumultuous changes taking place in the first years of the 2020s, with the COVID pandemic, closed borders, virtual meetings, climate emergencies, and the Black Lives Matter movement. We invite you to contemplate what is changing in the field of heritage and what needs to change. Our host city of Sydney offers renowned cultural and natural heritage places, world-class facilities and great venues. While in Sydney, ICOMOS delegates will have the opportunity to experience some of our major cultural places, like the Sydney Opera House, Harbour Bridge, our Art Deco amusement park, Australia's National Maritime Museum, and the World Heritage inscribed Convict Hyde Park Barracks. They may also engage with local people and organisations involved in cultural heritage through our public heritage exposition. The day excursion to the Greater Blue Mountains World Heritage Area will include visits to the Three Sisters Aboriginal Place, ancient eucalypt forests and historic properties. Australia ICOMOS will be working closely with award-winning professional conference organiser Aranex.
As a strategic partner of the GA and having worked with ICOMOS since 2016, Aranex are looking forward to welcoming attendees to this world-class event in Sydney, Australia. We are delighted to partner with the Australian ICOMOS to host this memorable event that will leave a lasting legacy and accelerate ICOMOS GA into the future.
While in Australia, ICOMOS members will also be able to visit some of our amazing natural and cultural heritage sites, such as Uluru Katachuta in the Red Centre, the Great Barrier Reef, the Port Arthur Convict site, or our most recent World Heritage property, the Budge Bim Cultural Landscape. The General Assembly will be held at ICC Sydney, our premier integrated convention, exhibition and entertainment precinct. Located in a prime waterfront setting in the heart of Sydney, where the majority of the city's hotels and accommodation are located, the venue is a short journey from Sydney Airport. And we are making the journey to Sydney and Australia even easier with support from our strategic partners Qantas, B Sydney, Destination New South Wales and Tourism Australia. We look forward to welcoming you to our wonderful harbourside city in 2023.
So we are now nearing the end of our ICOMOS GA 2020 Marker Event. Phew, I think we've almost made it. And just from me, I want to wish a huge congratulations to my colleagues, Richard, Steve and Ona, and all of the symposium co-chairs. I know that the huge amount of work and intellectual contribution that you've made so far will not be wasted, but will accumulate and combine to make GA 2023 in Sydney the best scientific symposium ever. So to close the Marker event, and before we finish with a series of slides acknowledging the many people that were involved in the sponsorship and organisation of the GA 2020, it's my great honour to welcome Toshi Kono, President of International ICOMOS. The screen is yours, Toshi.
Thank you very much. My name is Toshi Kono, the President of ICOMOS. I would like to congratulate on such a well-organized and impressive and wonderful event. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to sponsors for their generous support, and organizers and panelists for their wonderful work and efforts, and the global audience for their participation and wonderful support. I cannot wait for the GA 2023 with a very interesting topic, heritage changes, and with 4 R's, resilience, responsibility, rights, and relationship. This marker event will now finish, with a long list of GA 2020 acknowledgements and heartfelt thanks. Thank you for being part of the ICOMOS GA 2020 Marker Event.